No, I don't think so. He might be longer.
Yes, yeah, the blue one. Yeah. Ina mana, ina reo, ina karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou. Good morning and welcome to the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee of the 8th of October 2024. In terms of health and safety, if an alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit. The assembly point is across the road from this building. Actually, this is Bay of Plenty. Is across the road. It's out.
Yeah, that's actually
on 3rd Avenue.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you remember to speak clearly into the microphone and only one speaker at a time for clarity, and please turn off your mobile phones, and I'll turn the sound of my computer off. The opening karakia, tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tauai, te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa. Hoi me e, hui e, tai e. And this is a karakia for unity, and it's used to centre and call on the energy and vitality from the universe. Kia ora. So welcome to the committee members and to staff and to our CEO. We don't have any apologies for from this committee. I don't believe there are any late items. Have we got any late items to be put forward?
No.
No late items. There are no confidential business to be transferred into the open. Has anyone got a request for a change in the order of business? That being the case, there is no change. So we now go to point 6, the confirmation of the minutes. So this is the minutes of the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee meeting held on the 2nd of September 2024. So we're going to look at if there are any corrections to the minutes. I'd like to speak to this. I'd having a look at the minutes and trying to understand what we want the minutes to do is to record the meeting, the main points of the meeting that were talked about, and to also back up the motions that on the recommendations that are passed at each meeting. In quite a lot of governance meetings, there's a lot of discussion about minutes, and there's some things I would like to discuss with the democracy team on the minutes, and so there's a specific change I'd like to these minutes, but I'd also actually like to raise a motion that we have a workshop on minutes with the democracy team, just so that we are all getting the right things out of the minutes, if that's okay with staff. Is that all right with?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Does it require a motion?
Yeah.
So I'm happy to second that.
I'd like it again. It's then minuted if it's a motion that we are we look to make sure that, so we have a workshop to discuss how the minutes are recorded to add value to both the committee and the council and the people of Tauranga. So you have moved the motion. I'll second it.
Okay. Speak to it?
If you'd like to.
Actually, it's very timely because I did read some minutes from the Regional Councillor on the Public Transport Committee, and I was certainly alerted to the different style and content of those minutes in particular, and so yeah, it's worthy of a discussion moving forward for our term. Thank you.
I'll reserve my right as seconder.
Yeah, I'm very happy to support that. I think it would be good if it was just a generalised discussion around council meeting minutes. I think, yeah, as Councillor Currick said, there are perhaps strengths of different approaches, and I think for me there could be a simpler, more effective way of conveying some stuff, so very happy to support that.
And so from my side, I think it's important that where questions are raised by elected members, that we do record those questions. I think where, for example, the motion that we changed on the election report referred to the questions asked at the meeting, but the minutes didn't record those questions. So I think it's important that we actually, if there's a motion about questions, we do itemise what those questions are. And I would, in relation to these minutes, like the question I raised of our CEO was, did the election meet the requirements of the Local Government Act? And that was something that I would like recorded in the minutes, that we are going to approve, and we're going to improve on the way we're doing that next time. So, again, if we've corrected the minutes, what's the process that, so do we...
So you do it subject to the correction, subject to the following correction.
Okay, so subject to the correction in the minutes, that we record the question that needs to be answered on the 2024 election in terms of the CE meeting the requirements of the Local Government Act. I move that the minutes are approved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crowther. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Call for any conflict of interest at this meeting? Recorded that there are none. So we'll move to 9.1, accounting and funding operational expenditure and implications for a balanced budget. Welcome to Paul and Catherine and Tracy. And I asked Paul Davidson, our Chief Financial Officer, to introduce the report, which I believe is a PowerPoint. Thanks, Paul.
Morena, Chair, Mayor and Councillors. Yes, we've got a 3-slide PowerPoint to cover the next 2 reports, the first being around our operational performance for the 23-24 year, and then it's only 1 slide on this presentation. The 2 other slides cover the next report in terms of the annual report. These are obviously reporting on the 23-24 financial year. The first report that we'll talk about relates to operational performance. The second is around the annual report, which will focus more on our performance measures and around our capital expenditure performance. So I'll hand over to Catherine to talk through the first report, which talks about, as I said, our accounting and operation expenditure and implications for balanced budget.
Thank you. Good morning. Have I got this on? No. Now it's on. Okay, so Council has requested an explanation of the level of operating deficit that was appearing in the SOCRA, so I thought it would be helpful just to provide some background and have handed out an extract from the SOCRA just to explain the $85 million deficit that's being talked about. If you look at the SOCRA, which is prepared under accounting standards, we actually state our operating surplus before gains and losses at 41.6 million surplus. However, TCC, a number of years ago when this format was first proposed, have set in place a slightly different format which has subtotals. And those subtotals were to identify what we regarded as day-to-day operational revenue as distinct from asset or asset financing revenues. And we did that with the motivation of trying to be clear about how much we needed to raise to fund our day-to-day costs. And we felt if we didn't have that separation, we'd have these surpluses that would be confusing to the community. So the operational revenue is rates, user fees, grants and subsidies and finance revenue. Over time, there have been some changes in our expenses or increases in some expenses that actually relate to our capital. And so it's starting to kind of corrupt what we were trying to do, which was to make it really clear, are we operating a true day-to-day operating surplus or not? So what this report's attempting to do is to explain some of these differences in the expenses as well as the revenues, and how you should look at it. So certainly there is, if you look at our operational day-to-day revenue and you subtract from it the total cost of our operating expenditure, there is a big deficit. It's 85 million. And we've produced a couple of appendices and also a second handout to explain what makes up the whole of that difference, and Tracy will take you through that detail. But I was just going to talk first to some of the key kind of premises and things that sit behind it. I would note that we're I'm not aware of any other council that separates out into these subtotals. So if you look at other councils, they will just be preparing a total operating deficit or surplus based on all revenues and all expenditures. Right, so when we, some of the things that are sort of affecting the expenses line are things like interest on growth debt. So interest is an expense, and we collect rates to cover interest, but we don't collect rates to cover interest on growth debt. That's capitalised into reserves and over time paid for by development contributions. So in the SOCRA, where we've separated out and don't include revenue from DCs, we are always going to get a deficit result in that we're not going to fund all our interest. So that's a funding decision, a financing decision that means you'll always run a pure operating deficit on that. Does people know what I'm talking about there? Yeah. Okay. And the other area where it's becoming more and more pronounced is in items of expense that either in the past were treated as capital assets, capitalised as assets, or have just grown over time. They're sort of one-off big expenses that you do, and you don't really want to raise rates, spike up in rates in a year to cover the cost of something that's periodic. Doesn't happen very often. So those are other reasons that we have in the past, or council has in the past, decided to loan fund rather than collect rates for that expenditure. So if we go to the guidance of our revenue and financing policy, which under the Local Government Act, councils have to have a revenue and financing policy, and that forms part of the long-term plan process, and that requires that operational expenses are covered by operational revenue, unless council agrees it's prudent not to do so. So where we are looking at not covering costs, we would bring the matters to council, and there'd be a decision by council. And loan funding, the revenue and financing policy also says loan funding should not be used unless decided by council. And where it has decided to do loan funding rather than rates funding is normally where the expenditure has a long-term benefit, sometimes 5 or 10 years, but it cannot be capitalised as an asset. And so examples, or early examples of that, were grants that we're going to get paid to other organisations to build cricket pavilions and things like that. So you could raise rates in the year and fund the whole grant by that, or you could decide you're actually effectively supporting an asset for the community and so would loan fund it, and that has been the decision council's made in the past. And I have documented in the report, and just to quickly go over some of the key areas where those decisions have been made. The first, and probably quite a recent one, is capital development in the city centre. So an activity was set up to do capital development in the city centre. Not all of that work is able to be capitalised. It might be early design, consultation, or whatever it is that has to go through your operating lines. A decision was made to loan fund that. Long-term planning for growth areas and other city and infrastructure planning. So there have been decisions in the past that those pieces of work are large. Most of the capital, once you start constructing or doing detailed design, is capitalised, but the early work isn't. A decision was made to loan fund that. More recently, digital project development that had in the past been capitalised as an intangible asset and amortised over time. There was a directive that we could not do that, and so in the last couple of years that has come onto our SOCRA, Statement of Operating Revenue and Expense, and to be loan funded, and that loan funding is starting this year. And wastewater pond desludging was also a recent one where the costs are significant. Obviously, sludge builds up in the pond over a number of years and it needed to be cleared, and so rather than raising all the rates in 1 year, that has been a loan funded initiative. So a key part of agreeing that loan funding is we also seek council to agree a debt retirement charge that is rates funded and a life of that loan that is related to the benefit flow that comes from it. So most of the digital is proposed to be retired over a 7-year period, which is probably a conservative estimate of how long our investment and that sort of associated development lasts for. So we have in the past, when we have seen things in advance, we have sometimes set up a reserve. So the biosolids reserve is an example of that. It's been going for probably 6 or 7 years, and every 3 or 4 years there'd be some work on biosolids, and each year there'd have been an amount paid in. So on the year it's paid out, the reserve is sort of utilised as well. So every year's ratepayers, if you like, have contributed to that. It's not normally, the time frame for loan funded OPEX is not normally, you wouldn't regard it as intergenerational, but it is certainly saying the ratepayer of today shouldn't probably pay the whole lot of this because it's going to benefit ratepayers over a number of years. So that's kind of the way of thinking about the loan funding. So what you'll see through the long-term plan budgets and in the material that Tracy will talk to, there is debt retirement coming into a lot of that, and over time the debt retirement gets quite large. Debt retirement is a way of raising, when you raise rates but you don't have associated expenditure because you're just paying off debt. So that leads to surpluses. Does that kind of make sense to people? So over the LTP you'll see surpluses starting to show in the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue and Expense, and part of that is to do with debt retirement. The other big part is to do with depreciation. So over recent years, the council's policy and approach has been to fully fund depreciation, and that's kind of an expectation of prudent behaviour in local government. And depreciation's an expense, but it's not a cash expense. The reason it's important to fund it is that you have ongoing renewals, because these assets that are put in need to last in the community on an ongoing basis. So depreciation effectively provides cash to fund renewals. And also at TCC, a decision was made as it would be how you retire debt from an activity. So we run depreciation reserves for each activity, and the inflows will be the money collected or the depreciation collected. The outflows will be the cost of renewals and debt retirement. So at some stage, if you're interested, we can talk through the state of our depreciation renewals. That's probably something that will come through the annual plan process. And the last significant item, actually two more significant items. The last significant items is the Tauriko West Enabling Works program, which is basically a a kind of a funding stack deal to deliver roading associated with that State Highway 29 area. All of the flows in of other parties contributing to that come through the SOCRA, they come through the revenue, and the flows out come through the expenditure. They don't match perfectly in any year, and in the first couple of years the mismatch has been a deficit. So that's why that Tauriko West contributes to the deficit in this year. And the other kind of big thing over time is we have a number of big expenditures that have happened in the past to do with settlement of weather-tight issues and the Harrington Street car park, where we have effectively incurred debt in the case of Harrington Street to build the car park, or in the case of weather-tight settlements to make settlements that have no way of retiring debt. And so through the LTP, not in this year but in later years of the LTP, there is rates revenue collected to start to contribute to that debt retirement to clear those unfunded liabilities. And again, we can bring that to you as part of an annual planning process. And we have a flow of money for a risk reserve, which is to help pay for unexpected events in the future. So again, that's a rate collected over and above your operating expenses. So there's a lot that sits in that SOCRA that isn't just day-to-day operations, and that's what we've tried to set out for you briefly in this report. And I hand over to, so the second handout is a breakdown of the full 85 million of that sort of operational revenue not covering all expenses, and Tracy will talk you through that. The attachments, at the time we did the attachments, we're sort of trying to frame it slightly differently, so we didn't explain the full 85 in the attachments. This table that's a handout could help. I know there's been some comments about the annual report and needing a bit more information around the 85 million deficit, so this table could form part of that explanation if it makes sense to you. I'll hand over to Tracy.
Good morning. It's fair to say that it's been a bit of a journey looking at this balanced budget. No one's ever asked us the question before. And our systems, processes, reporting structures weren't set up to give you a quick answer. We're in the process of doing that. But what you're seeing in front of you in terms of, firstly, the attachment to the report and then the handout that we've just given you, I guess is the evolution in our thinking of how we explain what's happening here. We started out by thinking about what was the true operating deficit. And that's how we came to attachment. I think the attachment numbers have been slightly mixed up, but that's how we came to the attachment, which breaks down the 85 million back to a $35 million deficit. What we were trying to do was to pull out items relating to capital expenditure. So that's how we came back to the 35 million. And the attachment, the handout that was given to you this morning is more of a reconciliation back to zero. Thank you. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. It's completely up to you how we present this in future. We don't really have a preference. The information is essentially the same. It's presented differently. There's a little bit more information in the handout this morning. The first four or five items on the handout this morning, I think it's 4 items, are essentially reflected in the table on the attachment. So adding up to about $50 million. That's the capital items, the net impact. which leads to the $36 million deficit, which is further explained by the second 4 items in the handout this morning. So we have the capital items removed, and then to bring us back to a truly balanced budget, we're talking about large items relating to unfunded depreciation and capitalised DC interest mostly, plus a few net reserve movements and cash activity surpluses or deficits. As I say, an evolution in thinking. We welcome feedback.
Thank you, Catherine and Tracy. Do we have any questions for the staff? Councillor Crowther.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's really helpful, and I personally, I'm sure, speak on behalf of others. We appreciate the effort you've gone into. The debt retirement levy, there seems to me to be an element of that we could be storing a bit of a problem in the future because of it. But I understand, like, partly it came about, my understanding is because of the debt revenue ratio limits. Can you clarify, like, I know parts of it were not because of that, you explained that, but, you know, did part of it come about because there was a pressure to keep down current rates and pressure on the debt revenue ratio at certain points? And if that's the case, can we actually, I guess, put it right now and actually, because we're likely to have more debt headroom, can that actually get us back to more of a, I guess, a theoretically appropriate way of handling that?
I'll just go back to debt retirement levy was first introduced in 2019 long-term plan. For exactly that reason, we went to the community to consult on basically the introduction of a levy to allow level of service to continue or reduction in level of service, and that was the decision was made to implement a debt retirement levy, which effectively has from a balance sheet ratio perspective, has the advantage of both increasing revenue and reducing debt. So it's a numerator denominator benefit that sits with that. It has been used in that instance in terms of the control to stay within covenants. So absolutely, council can consider that in light of any potential change to limits and what that might mean to both where debt covenants land and also where rating levels land. There are other elements to that as well. So, for example, any amount going into a risk reserve has a similar impact. Effectively, is that it's increasing a rate now and reducing debt. It's doing a similar function as a debt retirement levy because there's no actual expenditure going out at a point in time. All of those things can come back as part of an annual plan or long-term plan conversation.
If it's helpful for the current, the year that's just been, we did have a small amount of debt retirement, about $3 million on that same basis, but it was replaced with the decision in the LTP with the decision to use IFF in the community space. So, because the IFF was taking items off balance sheet, so that isn't continued, that debt retirement into this financial year. The only debt retirement that's sitting in there is, there may be a small amount flowing into those unfunded liabilities that sort of increased over time in the LTP, but it's really just those specific decisions around operational spend. You need to retire this, otherwise it's stranded debt. So that is quite a different basis from that, from what Paul has talked about.
Thanks, Tracy. Mayor Drysdale.
I have a couple of questions, and one of them is probably a good follow-up to Glenn's, but just around that digital SaaS. So this is effectively developing the program to fit our organisation. Is that the sort of capital nature of that?
So previously it's been capital, now it's more operational in nature because it tends to be more cloud-based services that aren't assets sitting on our books anymore, which is why it's now going through that operational expenditure line and not our capital expenditure line, which it would have in the past. And that's why we've treated it that way. So effectively it's having the same or similar impact as if it was capital expenditure, but it does flow through our operational expenditure line because we're not buying our assets anymore, we're buying software as a service through a cloud-based service. I'm sure there's digital people that can say that a lot better than what I just did, but that's in effect what it's doing.
So assumably in that though, but it's not going to be 22 million a year going forward, or it is every year?
It over a period of time it will level out. There's more going through the operational expenditure line, which will be consistent each year, but as it matures into a consistent cycle, you won't see increases like we're seeing at the moment because it's new to treat through that operational expenditure line. But it will continue to go through that operational expenditure line because that's how that will be treated going forward.
But at that level,
depending on the program that's set, potentially yes. Yep.
because I guess so if it was 22 million a year, which you're effectively paying for cloud services, then that to me is an operational expense.
That's right.
If it's developing the software, that then it's going to drop to 10 million a year. So then I'd say that all the 12 million becomes the
Exactly, and that's the balance of the program. As we bring those forward, we need to split them between what's going to go through capital lines and what's going to go through operational expenditure lines. Some, and again, a digital person can say this better than what I can, but we've seen over recent years that more of it has gone through that operational expenditure line because we moved more into that cloud-based environment than previously, where it's all been our development and it's all been capitalised as an asset and therefore loan funded. So but there still can be some capital-based expenditure that goes through that line.
Yes, I guess the direction going forward is we've just got to split which part of that is operational and which part is capital, and then just using, I guess, from Glenn's example, I'm just trying to understand it. So let's call it 21 million to make it easy. So what you would do then is over the next 7 years, you retire 3 million per year over the next 7 years. Is that?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
No.
And if it was going through capital, it would be depreciated over a similar period. So the net ratepayer impact isn't dissimilar because if we had 21 million going through the capital line that was depreciated over that period, we'd be charging $3 million to rates through depreciation. Because it's going through the operational expenditure line, we're effectively loan funding on that and then amortising that loan over that similar period. So you're getting a similar ratepayer impact, but it's showing on different lines of what was going through capital is now going through P&L.
Okay, thank you, and thank you. I reiterate Glenn's. This is really useful to have a breakdown. So thank you.
I just had one question on depreciation. I think, Catherine, you said the council policy is to fully fund depreciation, except for 22 million. Or for,
Sorry. In transportation, it has not been to fully fund because NZTA pays 51% of renewals. So there's always been a non-funded portion of depreciation in transport, but the approach has always been with waters and other areas that we aim to fully fund that depreciation. When the revaluations hit, in the year a revaluation happens, we fund to budget just because there are no rates to fund it, and then in the LTP or annual plan, once we know that is such a high value, if it would mean a 4% increase in rates to meet that or a 3% increase in rates, then council has the option to phase it in, which is what's happened in the long-term plan. The depreciation has been phased in over that long-term plan because it was such a big leap in value ahead of what had been kind of planned as a cost increase expectation. It was just Three Waters was across the country a shock to most councils, and most councils non-funded a portion as a result and are phasing it in.
So on the basis of, so there's a revenue and financing policy. Could we have a copy of that for the next meeting, please? And I think Catherine commented that the operating expenses are covered by operating revenue. That's part of the policy. So in terms of going, this is where we were at the 30th of June. In terms of going forward, what are you feeling are approved expenditure that is allowed to be seen in here in a year's time, or as at June next year? What can I just get a sense of what you're treating as we can do this again next year versus actually we need to specifically come back and get approval for that not being part of SOCRA?
So part of the October 29 meeting will be a conversation with the council effectively in terms of working through that list of items and what are they, what's the direction of council in terms of what is okay, what needs to be looked at differently, etc. in terms of, and then we will take that and form that into the next annual plan.
Great, I think that's a good solution going forward. Are we happy with that? Thank you. So just in terms of, and we've got a discussion on the annual report, at the moment I think there isn't an explanation because nobody's ever wanted it before, but it would be good to have something if we can in the annual report, but we can come to that. Should we come to that when we're talking about the annual report or now?
Either is fine. We have some wording, and as Catherine suggested, is to include the table with explanations to the table in the annual report.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you. And just one other comment. I think one of you two suggested that we are doing better than most councils, and I just want to suggest in the annual report reporting, I'm very happy that we're best practice and that we are upping the bar in terms of what's reported to the constituents. So please take that as a compliment that we're doing that and continue to have that as a bar to be keeping up to. Okay, so thank you for that report. Does that come? Oh, so one other question before we get to the motion, because I'll ask it. I might as well ask it while we've got time. The C on the recommendation that the overall operating deficit, there's a rate deficit of 1.6 million that's funded by unbudgeted borrowing. Where does that fit into this discussion?
Good point. Unbudgeted borrowing is a lot. It's a stranded debt, effectively. So, because if we haven't collected enough rates to cover all of that expenditure, then it ends up as part of our debt. So, at 0.6% or at 1.6 million, it's not huge relative to our other unfunded liabilities, but it is. We're just reporting to you that we have exceeded costs within the overall.
Even after we've taken these operating costs out of operating costs, we've still got 1.6 million deficit. It's just, it seemed a little figure to be part of the motion, and I didn't quite understand. So we've got...
Where it fits on here, effectively, within revenue from operations and total operating expenditures, there'll be rate funded and non-rate funded expenditure within that. So that's effectively extracting all of the rate funded revenue and the rate funded expenditure, and that's the equivalent of the 85 on the rate side. Effectively, is that number 1.6 million effectively that's in there.
Don't do that. Okay, we've got one more question. Thank you, Councillor Crowther.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify, and I might just be misunderstanding, but it says in the agenda 28.5 million relating to a large depreciation overspend, and I'm just trying to get my head around the 22 and what was handed out this morning in the attachment, which is on screen, I think, for people watching. can you just clarify the different numbers? I think you mentioned 29 as well in the agenda report, which I presume is the 28.5 rounded to 29. I think that's the same. But the 22, I'm just trying to get my head around how the 22 and the 29 go together.
Oh, okay. Does it? Okay, so well, I'll let you answer. You've got it.
Again, as a as an evolution in thinking in terms of presenting these reports. So there was unfunded depreciation of 22 million, as you've seen. There was a further slightly more than 6 million, which initially presents as an overspend in cash-funded activities. So 2 of our waters activities are what we call cash-funded. They're not funded by the general rate, or by rates. They're funded by user fees. And there was over-budgeted depreciation costs in those activities as well. So you could put those 2 things together, and that comes to your 28.
Sorry.
Through the chair, where would that be recorded on the table that's there? Is that under the other or no? Yeah.
It's under the cash activity.
Oh, I see.
So that's 5, meaning 6.5 going in one direction, and then some money going in the other direction.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for those detailed explanations. So I'm going to move a motion to accept the recommendations in this report. Those being that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report, Accountability and Funding, Operational Expenditure and Implications for Balanced Budget, notes the operating deficits recorded in 23-24 and budgeted for 24-25 include items for which operational funding is intended to be phased back in over the 24-34 long-term plan, returning council to a surplus by 28-29. Notes that within the overall operating deficit there is a rates deficit of 1.6 million, which is funded by unbudgeted borrowing. Do I have a mover and seconder for that motion? Martin is moving. Glenn is seconding. Do you want to speak to the motion, Martin? Councillor Rosenborn.
Just reach the button. All I'd like to say is I'd like to thank the council financial team for their clarity in the presentation of the expenses. What we're trying to achieve here is something that the general people of Tauranga can follow, and I believe now that the way that this is presented allows the people of Tauranga to clearly see what the council does, how it does it, and where its money's going. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion from members? I guess my question just is, are we comfortable that we are returning council to a surplus by 28-29, or is that taking it out a little bit too far? Mayor Mahe.
Yeah, I think this is probably a bit more work that we need to do, but I think if we look at that, sorry, let me just get my. If we look at that attachment, breaking down, if we take out the capital, and then we, I think it's attachment 2, if we take out the capital sort of nature, and then we if we're using that sort of reframed operating deficit, I would like to see that to be returned to surplus or at least break even within the next 2 years.
Which I think is sensible we add to the motion. So are you happy that that returns the council to a surplus by, and put that as 26, 27?
25, 26.
25, 26. Martin, are you happy with, are we allowed to do that as a change?
Just for clarity, that would be a 1 year return.
It's only 1 year away, yeah.
Wouldn't it?
No, next year's 24, 25. And then
We're around now.
We're in 24, 25.
Yeah, but,
So the annual plan will be for 25, 26.
no, but it's still 2 years from this annual report.
Okay, but it's set within this year's annual plan already, so we would have to.
Already in this.
Okay.
Oh, so at the June 26, we want to be at zero. So that's the next annual report we'll have. But the annual plan right now may have to.
My suggestion would be that that we would bring options to do that as part of the annual plan process.
Yeah.
So it's clear, so we've just got an understanding of what those options would look like as part of that.
Yeah.
So if it was okay with the committee to say, provide options for the forthcoming annual plan process to return to surplus.
Yeah.
That would allow.
So we're going to put a timeline on that call? Provide options by...
My suggestion would be is that we could complete that work as part of the annual plan process. So then that will give us an understanding of the implications, and that would then impact the timing. So if the committee wanted to, as part, or as the council, as part of the annual plan, return it in 1 year, with the implications of that would be understood as part of the annual plan. If those implications resulted in something that we didn't want to do in that year, for example, we could fund all depreciation in 1 year, but rates would go up a lot. It would give the committee the ability to actually make those decisions in the annual plan.
So we're just going to formulate this annual plan process to bring council to break even by end of 25, 26. No, yes, we do. So we're able to put that. Sorry, we're just formulating the motion that we have just verbalised.
Can I send it to you for email?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
So we have made a change on B to say notes that the operating deficits recorded for 23-24 and budgeted for 24-25 include items for which operational funding is intended to be phased back in over the 24-34 long-term plan, and provide options within the annual plan process to bring back to this committee to break even by 25-26.
I think it'll go to council.
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than
Just
Committee
In terms
and
of timing,
council,
it might be
but-
council, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Council.
To council.
And then take out the words.
Yeah. Let everyone have a read of that. So Martin, you moved the motion. Are you happy to have this as an amended to the motion?
Yeah, are we going with break even or balanced?
Or either balance, balance probably fits in with the rest of the week.
To bring
Yes, but
that-
I'm okay with it as it is.
I'm comfortable that we're breaking, that the intention is we're breaking even. Councillor Martin, are you happy with that?
Yes.
Yes. And our seconder? Yeah. Okay, so that motion on the table, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Paul and Tracy and Catherine. I did have them written down too. So just as before we go on to the next report, something that we've discussed as a committee is just the reporting we are having for these meetings, and obviously our desire is that we are able to read the detail and ensure that we are adding value by looking from a governance perspective. And we would like to talk about an executive summary for these committees and potentially for council as well, having a little more structure around the executive summary needs to highlight any of the risks that are covered by the detail in the papers, highlights what TCC want elected members to make decisions on, and gives any direction on where you think elected members and the mayor need to focus on going forward. So I think it's something we'd like to see in the executive summary, more concise. These are the things that are highlighted to you as governors, rather than just setting out everything that's in the report. Because we want to be diligent and want to read, but I think there were 600 pages to read for this committee, and I think we need to have a little bit more steerage from you as the experts in terms of what the focus areas need to be. So if we can minute that as an action, please, and it's something I've had a brief discussion with the committee and our CE, and recognising it might be a work in progress, but really it's just to say recognising we want to have the detail there, but we might just need a bit more help guidance on what we need to focus on. So that's an action for the minutes that we're now having actions for. That's great. Okay, thank you. Second one. Where are we at? Draft annual report. Is that where we're at?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
9.2.
So, Paul, are you going to lead us through this discussion?
Yes, just to introduce this paper. So this follows on from the previous paper where we spoke about the operational performance. The annual report obviously includes both operational performance, but also the capital performance and the performance measures of the organisation based on the previous long-term plan. So in terms of, we can just flick to the slide across, just in terms of capital performance, to note it has been the largest capital program delivered, of around 419 million. You can see the various elements compared to budget on the screen. The annual report also breaks down the key projects and the highlights of the year within the sections. We have included and updated based on this committee's previous review of the annual report to include some amendments for those changes as desired, and we also have included, or that includes a list of all completed projects, whether they be multi-year projects. So that's comparing not just the annual budget performance, but the full, where projects have been delivered throughout the year, the full cost of that project versus budget. So that is now included within the annual report. As Catherine mentioned, and from the previous paper, we'll include some more balanced budget commentary in there. So that's the financial side, and then Jeremy can talk to the next slide on non-financial performance as well. I'll hand over to
when we get it. Pregnant pause. Oh, well. When we get there, it's exactly the same as what you saw on the 2nd of September. So while the audit process is still underway and there's a little bit of tweaking going on, and obviously the whole QA review type process is still underway, the basic headline, 66 met, 31 not met, 3 not measured, is exactly the same as it was on the 2nd of September. There's an update, I think, on the water loss one, which isn't in your agenda papers at the moment, but we were working on the 22-23 information. That information comes through each year in October, so we didn't have it for the September meeting, we didn't have it for the agenda here. We've got it now, and it's gone down from 16.6 to 14.1% water loss, so that will be reflected by the time we get to council on 29th of October. But other than that, business as usual, nothing to see here.
just a brief update on the audit process. And Sheree can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's working well, and we should at this stage be having clearance prior to the 29th of October. Annual report is required to be adopted by the end of October. We are working through one technical matter, which is around the divestment of Marine Precinct. We just had to get some more technical advice on, but that's, to my knowledge, the only outstanding item that we're working through at this point.
Thanks, Paul. Do we have a timing on the Marine Precinct response?
We have just received a response, and we're just working through that technical response with Audit New Zealand. So.
Councillor Kurek.
Thank you, Paul. What was the nature of that technical response?
The transaction, it's largely because it's a staged transaction over a longer period of time. It was just working through the accounting treatment of how a staged disposal effectively would be treated. That's really what it's about.
So do we have any questions for staff on the draft annual report? I have a number. Do you want to start? Shall I? So thank you for the detail. I guess at the beginning, so we're in a unusual situation where we have got the mayor and elected members were not elected at the time of this annual report, and we were again an unusual situation that we had commissioners in place. I feel there needs to be a bit more consistency in terms of how we refer to. I think there's commissioners, both with capitals and non-capitals. There's council with capital and non-capital. There's TCC and there's we. And I think on page 1 and 2, I think it would be sensible to actually define better that this was in year 4, I think it was, of commissioners governing Tauranga City Council. And I think it's important that we do and I have given Paul a bit more detail about some of the times where we haven't got that consistency. Where commissioners made a decision, I think it's important we say, and whether, I don't know what the term is, whether it's commissioners or commission, so I'm going to say commissioners, that sometimes we say council made a decision and sometimes we say commissioners made a decision. I think as we are under commissioners for this report, I would like to see it said commissioners made a decision on, for example, on Cameron Road Stage 2, and so we just have that consistency through so that it is a readable document for for the people of Tauranga.
That's fine. We'll pick those up.
Thank you. Just in terms of staff numbers, I think we talk about them, and then there's a table, page 73 of the document and 78 of the annual report, or the other way around. We've got FTEs and number of staff, but the description just says total employees, and one is 1148 and one is 1255. Just make the description total FTEs or total staff, just for clarity. I did then note that there was a full-time equivalence referred to again, but I didn't have the page number, so just when you're doing the draft, can you just see if you can find that one? And we also, in the on page 273 of the attachment, of the annual report, we did request that we had the number of staff, number of full-time equivalents, the cost of the staff, and the cost of consultants on the same page, because we think that's actually quite an important number to know how many people are working on the business of delivery in Tauranga.
So that's all there, just excluding the total number of employees we need to add to that table for you to tick all those boxes.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There was an explanation on annual report page 73 that talks about the number of people that we've brought in because of the maintenance contracts, and so we would like, and apologies if we have received this already, just a breakdown of the maintenance staff brought in house, the cost of the work previously to be then brought in, what it's costing now, and the number of new employees that actually relates to.
Yes, we're actually preparing a comprehensive report on that. That'll be brought back to on the 9th of December.
Okay, 9th of December, thanks. To the whole council, or to this meeting?
That'll be council.
Full council.
Full council.
Can we just have that as an action, that's happening, please, so I remember? Page 83, it says that the Chief Executive is responsible for administration of the council, and I'd like that increased to say the Chief Executive is accountable for the delivery of the strategic objectives of the council, of managing risk, and ensuring we are within statutory requirement, and empowering the staff to deliver for the people of Tauranga. So I think, or some such words that are agreed, but I think we need to recognise the work that the CE is doing rather than just administrating. If that's all right with you, Chief Executive.
Sounds like a big job.
Page 84, because on one of the measures we only had 49% were agreeable with that we are involving the Tauranga community in decision making. I think it's important, that's a concern to me, and I think I'd like to see, which we might ask for separately, how we're improving on that. But we say on page 84, how you can have your say. There are ways that you can have your say on the governing of Tauranga City Council. I think it's important to say that you can have your say on the governing and operation of Tauranga City Council. It's important that we do share that that's an operating, how it's operating as well. I then have got a number of comments, which I'm not sure I need to read out, I have shared with Paul, just in terms of some of the wording, sorry, and I should have shared it with Barbara as well, or Alistair, just in terms of some of the wording, which I'm not going to go through, but I would just like it sharpened up a little bit in terms of that. Really, again, just trying to make it a readable document. If 265 pages is readable.
We have those words and we'll make sure they're action.
On page 218, I guess the Tauranga Art Gallery, we have understood that there was some a contract agreed with how the renovations for the art gallery were funded. I didn't know if that should be part of the annual report. I will leave that as open if it should be. And again, they say the highlight is we've had seismic strengthening, but then in the looking ahead, undertake seismic strengthening. So can we just...
The latter is correct, and this will be reported into the next annual report.
Okay, right. And in the table on rates, thanks for itemising commercial. Is commercial and industrial put together?
Yeah, so commercial industrial, so the new industrial category came in the current rating year. So
Okay,
for the
right.
23-24 year, commercial includes industrial.
Right, okay.
Category.
Okay, great. And then, as I've said, just a bit of formatting and just if we can, whatever we can bring in this year would be good. Tables are difficult to, but really just making sure that we're going the same direction on dates and just your formatting without the 2023 in each column heading would be clearer, I think. So those are my questions.
The only exception for the date, and simply because the funding impact statements are required under the Local Government Act and have a specific format of 23-24. That's
I understand that one. Thank you, team. Any other questions? Councillor Crowther.
Thank you. Let's go through with a few more notes. I had a question in terms of the population forecast on page, I guess it depends, whatever it is on the plan, page 4 of the report. Sorry. Is that consistent with the forecasts that are being used elsewhere in the organisation? Because it seems very low that we've traditionally had higher population growth than 18-20 per year, and I had seen some other smart growth information which showed a different number. So you don't have to answer it now if you don't know, but maybe just to check that. And the other question on that sort of big table on that page was 2 universities. I'm struggling to figure out where our second one is. So, if it's, unless one's appeared, we've made it one.
University. When we find out what you're talking about.
Oh, on,
I'm not the author of that particular section, but I'd assume we need to change it to tertiary institutions to include the Polytech at Windermere.
+1 Polytech.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
the Polytech, the university, and the Wānanga.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. So just put, maybe 1 + 1 + 1 or 3 or whatever you want to, whatever. But just putting 2 universities +1 poly is, I think, confusing. What page am I on? On page 23, the start of those outcome measures. Just the comment, I guess, more than a question, but it doesn't really indicate whether we're on track or off track, and that there is a trend, but there's a difference between the trending and whether we're actually on target. And I think that's something which will be picked up by what the chair has kind of said. if we go through some of those measures. But I think the general thing for me is that as they are at the moment, they're not really indicating, you could actually be heading in the right direction but nowhere near quickly enough, or vice versa. So I think probably for the next year's report that would be a key thing I would highlight, and I guess for this year it's a question of whether there can be any refinement made on any of that in time. And again, you don't have to sort of feedback if you want. Either way. So
that's simply a baseline report which was reported to Council in June. So the intention, all these outcome measures came into the 24-34 LTP. So there's no obligation to report against them in the annual report this time around. Because the baseline report was done, which was effectively to create that baseline to work out whether things are working in the right direction when we report against it next year. So the intent of that baseline report was to say, here's the starting point, it's not complete. There were some gaps at the time, which is fine because we've got time to cover those gaps before next year. So the intent was just to include these for completeness, for information for the community, and as a starting point for a better conversation in 12 months' time.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I think that would be maybe it might be helpful to tease that out a little bit in the introduction to it. I might have just misunderstood it a bit, but I think it would be good for the members of the public who just sort of read it very briefly, potentially, just to really highlight that we will have baselines and better tracking of this in future years. And one specific comment in terms of some of these in the tech side of it, where I think it could be helpful this year is, and this is just one sort of example, but there'll probably be other ones that I've noted, which I won't go into in questions, but it talks about collectively diverted around 6,200 tonnes of garden waste and landfill. I mean, presumably we do have baselines for some of this, and we do have measures for some of it, so it'd be quite helpful in those kind of examples to put in out of, X tonnes, so that we actually get a bit of a feel of whether that's a big diversion or a little diversion. And same when you get into some of the waste measures there, if there are established baselines, to actually just, anything you can put in, I think would be helpful around that. One question around on page, I keep seeing the PDF numbers, so 62 of the PDF, 57 of the report, where it talks about median house price, 840,000, and that's a June 2024 REINZ. Are we actually talking about house price or sale price? Because I note that CoreLogic, their median house price for that date was around 920, and if we're going with sale prices, I think it's kind of I question the usefulness of that measure at this time in the market, and wonder if we're better to actually put, like for the people of Tauranga reading it, they're probably more interested in where are we at overall in the value of housing in Tauranga, I would think. So is there any clarity in terms of whether we really are talking about the overall house prices in Tauranga, or are we talking just the sale prices, which based on that?
I haven't got the detail. If it comes from Real Estate Institute, I imagine it's sale prices.
Yeah, because I would think my view would be it'd probably be better to put in the actual housing index price or something that you could track over time without the variabilities of the market.
So if that's the Community's view, then we can change it.
Well, I guess I would say, because sale price is actually what's happening in the market compared to what's guessing in the market. But it is like as Glenn says, if you do it for 1 month, you probably need to look at a sort of a 12-month trend, I think, rather than a 1 month trend. I'm quite comfortable with actual sales, but probably over a longer, like for that 12 months, that this is the median house price.
So over the 12 months, the trend is from 895 the year before to 840. So unless you wanted each month we've got the trend in that graphic, because the previous year's figure was underneath it.
Yeah, but I think you need to look at what is the median house price over that year, not just 1 month. Because 1 month, there might be 6 house sales in that 1 month, and you may have had high-end houses sell in June and none in other months. Like, I think you've got to look at the 12-month data, not just 1 month.
I'll check it. I suspect it's 12 months data, refreshed every maybe month, every quarter by RENZ, but my suspicion is that that's 12 months data.
Then that would be fine, yeah.
So on that same page, the emissions, scope 1 and 2 emissions reduced compared to the 2019 baseline, 33% down. It talks about, includes Bay Venues emissions and excludes emissions from Three Waters. I don't quite understand why we're excluding the Three Waters emissions.
We'll come back.
Okay. And if there is, to sort of save time, maybe if there is a valid reason, that's fine, but maybe just put it in there so anyone else who's got that question will know. I just, following on from the Chair's comment in terms of the satisfied or neutral on the table on page 61 of the plan, which was talking about residents who are satisfied or neutral with the way council involves the public. I guess it would be helpful to either have a net score in there, seeing it is such a significant measure, or to just state the number who are satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, because it's a bit of a blunt thing. I mean, the implication is it looks like 49% were dissatisfied. We don't know how many were satisfied and how many were neutral. So to actually just tease that out doesn't seem like that'd be too complex, and it's probably one of the more significant measures in the report. And a question in regards to, gosh, what is this? Page 70, which is page 65, I think. 65 of the report. So we talk about the CapEx, capital delivery, how it's 418 million, 106% of the 397 million annual plan budget. So I went back to the annual plan to check my memory, and indeed the annual plan stated 355, not 397, and the LTPA had said 434, which raised an initial question of, are we actually over or under what we set out to do? I guess if the annual plan was the one that was the most recent, we're presumably over that, but are we significantly over, or is it actually the 397? And I guess into this question feeds the broader issue, which is these various changes in definition around this. And I guess you're probably in a better position to even understand what the question should be, but it's trying to tease out, are we actually comparing like with like, and is the like with like genuinely 397 versus 418?
I can put some words in to make it clearer, but the like for like is 418 versus 397, and it's the whole operational projects of a capital nature being brought in and reported in the capital program. So the difference between what was approved at the annual plan is the capital program of the 355, I think you said, that would have excluded the operational projects of a capital nature. So I'll make it very clear in here that there's a movement, and it's just based on how we're reporting those projects.
Thank you. So when there's also, I can't quite find it right now, but there was a table, I believe, which listed a comparable. Sorry. I can't quite easily find it, so I won't take up time now, but there's a table, I believe, somewhere in there which lists a 5-year, rates, CapEx, etc. In that list of CapEx, will the numbers actually be comparable to the 397? In other words, do you have to retrospectively change those earlier ones to do a like for like, or is this just is just changed in the last year, so we are able to track it right through that time.
So the 397 was a budgeted number. This table on page 72 of the document, which is the 5-year trends, this is actuals, so there's no budgeted numbers in here. The 418 for 2024 is the 418 capital program number that we've been consistently talking about. The 293 will include a portion of those capital projects of an operational nature, and then going back further, we didn't have any of those projects, so it was purely capital for the first, I guess, 3 years of that table.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just leave it. If that seems the clearest way, that's fine. I guess it didn't seem intuitively easy to sort of read the different numbers and make sense of it. So if there is a clearer way to do it, that'd be fantastic. And I had a question in regards to the table on page 75, where it talks about supporting community groups and initiatives. The numbers for, I'll just pick a couple of them, which I had particular questions. One was the Bay venues, whether that incorporates all aspects like the loan funding in there, and for, what's the other one? Oh, priority 1, does that include all project funding?
So the BVL 13.1 million includes the operational grant of 5.5 mil, the debt retirement grant of 1 mil, and then interest and renewals grants of 6.6 mil, totaling 13.2 million. Priority 1, I think I've got the answer here because I anticipated that question. I'll just have a look through my papers. I'll have to dig it out through my emails because I did query that one, and I'll carry on and I'll dig it out.
The page, I'm sort of flipping around a bit, I think, but apologies for that. 59, the debt revenue ratio. Are the 218% and the 180%, are they actually the LGFA ratios that I guess are the main sort of headline number that most people in our community look at? Or are they the sort of internal ratio? I forgot what the right term is for that one.
So the LGFA ratio, which we align our financial strategy, is what we report through this section 2, which you're looking at. There is another form of calculation of that ratio, which is the prudence one, which allows you to include certain revenue types, and it doesn't allow you to net debt off with LGFA borrower notes, so the two are slightly different. But throughout the section that you're looking at, that will be our financial strategy, which aligns to the LGFA ratio.
On page, oh yeah, sorry, keeps going up. On page 68, under the list of, I'm going to turn my head, projects, it has Totara Street capacity improvements, and I'm just struggling. I just wonder in terms of, I don't want to get too much into the detail, but that one stood out a little bit as I'm trying to think what we did to, I guess you, before we arrived, to improve the capacity on Totara Street, and I'm struggling to understand what that refers to.
We can expand on that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's brilliant. Yeah, maybe if there's a chance, just if I can answer to us in the meantime, once you,
Yes.
when you get a chance. Thank you. Where is it? Oh yeah, the other thing with the CapEx, and I guess I'll just frame it as a general sort of question, is there a way to more clearly tease out what is land purchases from any capital spending in the last year? Because my observation is that there seems to be a significant amount of acquisitions and sales of property, probably more than normal. Would that be fair? And the cost of that potentially could be quite significant. I know you've got some internal adjustments and different things, but it's not clear to me, for instance, in one section on page 77, it talks about other community, including land purchase, under the what the debt will pay for. And in another section, it had capital spending, which seemed to include it. And then I think, if I understood it correctly, there's another part of the report that had capital spending where that, I think, was taken out. And I'm just wondering if there's any way of teasing that out, because it does seem quite different from the people of Tauranga's perspective. Are you actually just buying a bit of land that one day we might sell or not, versus we're actually building something or doing something that they would see as typical CapEx?
Yes, we can take a look at it. We do record that information separately, so we'll try and work out what makes most sense. But sometimes you purchase land as part of a piece of work. So are you seeing that going into the, hey, it's part of the work, or into a separate strategic land purchase? There's not a whole lot of strategic land purchase, but we can tease it out on just just trying to understand the message that you'd most like to tell.
I guess from I mean, obviously, so the committee, maybe we need to, bring that into the workshop, which looks at capital and OPEX. But from my point of view, it's where you actually have something which is part of a project. So you say you buy a property and you build something on it. I think what you're talking about it's probably pretty clear. It's all part of a project to deliver something definitively to the community. If it's actually just, well, I'm thinking of, say, the parking spaces for 3 lots purchased on Devonport Road, it seemed like a lot of that is just money tied up in land. And yes, we're providing a benefit, but that's sort of almost a side issue, it seems, when that was purchased for some strategic reason. It's sitting there. We were told it was purchased, as strategic property acquisition. That's just money tied up in property. It'd be nice to know how much is tied up in strategic property as opposed to buying a bit of land to build a community centre or something like that.
The answer is yes, we can pull out anything that's in that strategic land category.
Okay, thank you. You didn't touch on the employee assistance, did you?
It's in my list too.
Oh, okay, that's right.
You can touch on it.
Okay. Just had a question in terms of where it says above national average under the employee assistance program, in terms of staff taking up services. I guess I'm interested in whether there's any data around whether that's because there's a higher need for it, or because we are offering a more generous package, or because staff at council are more open to, to taking up these benefits. It'd be, I think there are multiple reasons why it could be there as a higher. So is there any data around that? Is there any understanding?
Suggest if the committee is okay with it, that we bring it back as part of future health and safety and wellbeing reporting.
That'd be great.
I would suggest, though, that as I have in my table paper, that we don't have that reason that it's staff more willing to use the facility. I think it's a data, leave it there. I don't know if that explanation, not sure I agree with the explanation, so I would suggest we just don't have it there. I don't think it's necessary. It's good that we're reporting it, but I'm not sure it's the only reason.
And the last one I'll mention is, I know Councillor Schooler has put through information around things like the performance measures for transport, but I just had a specific question around how our council records bus data versus how the public transport committees record it, because we have in the 2022-23 result we said bus, this is the opportunities for walking, cycling, bus travel, etc., proportion of people journeying to work, and it says 3% for that previous year, 2% for the 23-24 result, and 10% for the target. It does raise the broader issue of have we got an appropriate target if we're always going to fail, which I think we will. But specifically, bus patronage went up. The journeys for vehicles as a vehicle as the driver, to quote, that went up quite significantly from 52 to 61%. But the number of people on buses dropped. And I'm really trying to get my head around looking at all this. I was sort of going, but the bus patronage went up so significantly that it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. And so do we have different data sources?
Yeah, I can find the data source for you. I don't know what it is at the moment, off the top of my head, but we can find that and get it back to you.
Because I think it would be helpful to actually get it right in this report and to double check with regional council data and just see if and I know there's a difference between journeying to work, but it would be helpful to understand that. Thank you. That's my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Any other questions from the committee? Oh, thank you. Thanks, Cherie.
So the amount disclosed in that table, that includes all grants paid to Priority 1, including for this year and last year, we've rebased the Education New Zealand and Film BOP grants that were previously separately disclosed into the Priority 1 because they were actually a payment to them.
Thank you. That finishes our discussion with staff, and thank you, Cherie, Catherine and Paul and others for that. I'm happy to move the motion that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the draft annual report, and I would add to the recommendation and request that staff make the edits and adjustments discussed and tabled at this meeting. Requests that.
Yeah.
So, would I have a seconder for that motion? Thank you, Mayor Mahe. We'll just put it up. And this is recognising that where you can, you will make changes, but going forward, I think we're just setting the scene that we're just looking at a bit more, making sure we're concise in what we're reporting. So I'm moving that and recognising that there will need to be, there may not be every single thing is updated, but that you've heard the comments that have come from the committee, and I also want to thank the team for
their knowledge of the annual report. It's impressive, and just taking the time to take us through our first annual report. And we're happy to be part of that going forward in terms of how we are reporting that in a readable fashion to our to the people of Tauranga. So I have moved the motion. Mayor Mahe, did you want to speak as seconder? Any discussion on the motion? That being the case, all those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right. So 9.3 Consolidated Performance Measures Framework. Jeremy, I think you're speaking on this one. Thank you.
I'll do this one. So this paper was requested by the committee, by the chair, just to take us through how we got to where we got to on the performance measures. I guess the key point to start with is that the Local Government Act sets up your accountability framework and requires that the performance measures and targets must be at a level to assess the level of service for major aspects of groups of activities. That kind of sets the beginning framework. In the start of the LTP process, a couple of years, or 18 months ago, we sat down and looked at the performance measures. A large piece of work. There was probably general acceptance that the number of performance measures in the auditable section of the report was too large. We've just been through them, there's 100. And the previous council were the same view that needed to come down. They started off with a position of about 25, and then that really doesn't cover the major aspects of groups of activities, so it bumps up from there. And we ended up with a big process which went through with the organisation, with the executive, with the council of the day, and ended up with those two categories of measures, the service measures, which you see and will be part of the audited part of the annual report in the future, and then the outcomes measures, which Councillor Crowther mentioned earlier on, which are in the front half of the document outside the audited area, but also interesting stuff which the community should be aware of. The new LTP service measures were reported against in March. That's attachment 6 to this report. And so we test drove them before the year started. So before we had formally adopted them as part of the LTP, we test drove them in the March 6-monthly reporting. And that helps to iron out any glitches where we haven't got the ability to access data, or we've kind of got the wording and fraction wrong or something. So that was a handy little test drive before they were adopted in April's LTP adoption. They'll be measured 6 monthly, one through the annual report, and the other one which will come to you in February/March, depending on how the committee timings work out. The outcome measures are all part of the Our Direction refresh, so you'd have heard about this before. Looking at the city vision, and then Our Direction is council's response to the wider city vision, which then links in through the lead strategies and a variety of action and investment plans, including some new ones, but also a whole bunch which have been around for a while. Those measures, the baseline report was created in June, and we talked about that 15 minutes ago, and that's been reported in the front half of your annual report just as an FYI effectively, and then we start measuring those annually from now on, and you'll get that through the annual report in 12 months' time. There's also, I guess, a bunch of other things that we do measure. We mentioned the annual residence survey. That goes out each year, and you'll get a report to the CTE committee pretty much every quarter. There's 4 waves of that. About, I think, 27 of those direct questions asked find their way into the new LTP measures. So that's, there's a lot of that information gets used there. I've mentioned in the report quality of life and the vital updates, and of course at an activity level there's a lot of data and information gathered for all sorts of operational purposes which doesn't find its way up through this corporate reporting process.
Thank you, Jeremy. Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. Very useful reading, a lot of it. Just a couple of quick questions around the measures. So it's attachment 2, measures page 111, you've got a baseline target of 3%. This is for vegetation, so I'm assuming that's current levels of vegetation, with a target of 10%. So I'm assuming that's where we want to get to. So I'm assuming there's some KPIs involved in that. And do you also have effect on OPEX? I'm assuming for every area increase of vegetation we've got to pay for something. So linked with this, is there an OPEX expenditure assessment made?
Absolutely. So part of the ongoing operational budgets of the Spaces and Places team, they'll be looking to progressively increase that number, along with the, I think there's also a target in there to increase the tree canopy cover, so that they will be linked back to budgets. And if you wanted some more details about exactly the quantum of those budgets, I can certainly provide that.
Yeah, my question is more how do we link that into the annual plan and then into the long-term plan, so we're actually preparing a budget, because your KPI would suggest you're going to increase 1 or 2% annually. We'd have to increase the budget respectively in relation to the growth.
So yeah, so Paul, I guess that the budgets are put in place. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to have a think about how we actually show you tangibly that link back. So we can certainly have a think about how we do that and let you know.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is get to a point where we can get requests from the public to do parks and open spaces, and they want X amount of hectares, what the approximate cost is to them for every hectare of green space we add, and how much that's going to impact on us and their rates.
Certainly. So that's you've sort of expanded the question a little bit there, I think. No. And so definitely there's that KPI around increasing canopy, because that's obviously a health and well-being, and it helps with the cooling of the city, the climate control, etc., and the vegetation. But there's also the maintenance. And you're right, when we take on subdivision, so we have KPIs that require parks, so many metres apart. So that has a operational cost for our city operations team. And that report that comes on the 9th of December will also go into some detail about that for you. So hopefully that'll cover your question, and we can pick it up from there if it leaves some gaps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Any other questions? Councillor Crowther.
Thanks. I'm just wondering whether there's, in terms of the OPEX spending, operational spending on various sort of subcategories, whether there's a way to kind of be more transparent with some of it. So the example I use would be libraries, that in previous annual reports you could go and you could kind of go, right, this is what we spent on libraries, and I recall sort of going back and you could track it through different branch libraries and all that sort of stuff. It was quite sort of visible to the public, whereas now, unless I'm missing it, it seems to be like, it seems to have got obscured because we're sort of reporting at a higher level, I believe, so under the community services in that case. And I think it'd be really helpful to kind of have that a bit more accessible. It doesn't have to be sort of detailed, with every library and so forth, but just to kind of know, like when we're talking community services, as most of the rate spending going, to fund our libraries, to fund this, that, the other, at the moment it doesn't seem totally clear. And I guess by contrast, the CapEx does seem to be. So in the performance measures in the report, I believe there was significant capital projects, and you could easily see that we're building a new civic library, and the spend was 20, whatever it was, 11 point something mil, and then you have library stock, etc. So to do the same sort of thing for OPEX, I think would be really helpful to sort of get a bit of a feel of where we're actually spending most of the money.
Certainly have that information, and in quite a lot of detail. So I guess that's a conversation between Paul and myself as to how you actually drill down in the reporting that you're looking for.
Yeah, because you don't want to go too low to just overwhelm everyone with just massive detail, but to actually, like if we're spending, I presume, significant millions in OPEX on libraries, and we're talking, in the tens as opposed to the single digit of millions, then it's probably significant enough to say, well, maybe we should go back to what we used to do, where it used to be easily accessible.
So, yeah, certainly, as I say, we've got that information. I guess, Paul, do you want to make a comment on how we actually drop down a level into the annual report?
Well, it's probably too late for this annual report to make those sort of changes, but going forward we can have that conversation about that activity split in terms of what we can disclose going forward.
I think my point was more, we don't have to rush into it this year, but certainly to align it with these performance measures and to figure out at what level the reporting could also flow through to the OPEX, which is a bit like Martin used in his example too.
So is that sort of focused on libraries, or is there...
What? No, I think you could say it for Councillor Rosenblum's example, for the libraries as another example, but there'll be other things that different councillors probably would think, and then of course the public might have their own. So we just have to leave it a bit of discernment as to what are the significant things that will have an impact on operational expenditure and rates.
So as I said, we can have a conversation about what's the sweet spot, what's the right level to get down to in the reporting for future use.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have got a recommendation. I'm happy to move a motion, but I'll make a change again, so that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report Consolidated Performance Measures Framework, and takes account of the feedback from elected members received at the meeting today, particularly in relation to reporting going forward. I'll just put that up. Thanks, Carol.
Was there a second?
We're just gonna, I haven't seen it yet. Thank you. So I have moved that motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Currick, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Carried. Thank you. I think this would be time to take a 10-minute break. Do I have to go to that?
No, you don't.
So can we adjourn for 10 minutes, please? Thank you all. Morena, welcome back. Again, just noting that we are being live streamed, just for the public who are watching to also be aware that the three councillors and the mayor to my left are on the committee, and we welcome any elected members at this meeting, and they are able to speak. So just as a reminder for anyone watching the video. So we're up to 9.4, the Treasury strategy update, which I think Paul and Cherie are taking us through. Thank you.
Just to introduce this paper, it's consistent with the update that was provided at the last committee report. That was for information purposes. This one has now been updated for the latest information, and includes a series of resolutions around our issuance of debt and hedging. Cherie, if you want to make any comment.
Yes, so what Paul said, the last report was reflecting June results, so the year-end results for the Treasury function. That report didn't have the resolutions on it, so that was really to get you guys familiar with how the Treasury strategy is reported on a 6-monthly basis. I've brought this one back kind of out of cycle, updating it to 30th of September, so the first quarter of the financial year, and adding back in the resolutions. So the resolutions essentially approve hedging, debt issuance, and the cash flow management in adherence to our Treasury policy. The timing of getting this report on the agenda meant that some of the figures in here I had to forecast for September, so I'll just give an update on those. The average cost of borrowing, I used the August average cost of borrowing, which in the report is 4.82%. For September, it's 4.75%, so that reflects the OCR coming down and some of our floating debt having the rates reset on that. The retentions balance in the report was 1.9 mil, but it's actually landed at 1.8 mil for quarter end. And then cash and deposits I forecast to be 175 million, but they're 188 million at September month end. At the last committee meeting, I also gave you a verbal update on the $100 million of debt that we've issued this financial year, and the swaps as well. So now the graphs within this update reflect that $100 million worth of debt and swaps, and you'll see those particularly in the graphs on paragraph 7 and paragraph 30, and that's probably of particular interest is the fixed interest rate profile graph, where previously that grey line was a bit lower, and we've moved that up to the midpoint in the short term and much further off the bottom of the policy bands in the longer term. So gross debt is now 1.27 billion. We also have a LGFA maturity in April 2025 of 110 million, which we've now pre-funded. We wouldn't normally have pre-funded that quickly, but we've had a bit of cash surplus with the rates coming in and some of our capital forecasts not hitting as high as what we expected, and so we've made use of the high interest rate environment before the OCR starts tracking down to secure that pre-funding. Going forward, I'll come to you every 6 months with this Treasury strategy update, but in the non-6 monthly quarters, I provide the same information but more summarised into the quarter end financial results that Catherine and Tracy will bring up, along with performance and everything like that. That was all from me, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Cherie. Any questions for Cherie or Paul? I just have one on foreign exchange transactions. Are we anticipating, I think last time you said we hadn't had one since about 2020. Are we anticipating any coming up?
I haven't had any requests from the business for any overseas transactions that they need an FX transaction on.
And I guess therefore I would query the recommendation that we approve hedging for all significant foreign exchange exposures, whether we actually need that in there.
Yeah, we could take that out, and then we can come to you if there is a big FX trade that we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, if we only approve significant, so that implies that the little ones would be within the policy anyway.
I say no.
Yeah.
There's no issue with that.
The other thing is, Cherie, you did note when you talked about the recommendation that those approvals would all be in adherence to the Treasury policy, and I think that should be in the recommendation. You've actually said it anyway, but I'd like to add that to the recommendation. So thank you very much for that explanation and update from the summary you gave us last time. Thank you. So there is a motion in terms of the recommendations. I'm happy to move that motion with the addition of an adherence to the Treasury policy right at the end. If we put it up, it would probably be as easy then.
You want to take out.
Yeah, so we're going to take out D.
Take out D.
And put in adherence to the Treasury policy. Is that the right wording, Cherie and Paul? In adherence to the Treasury policy? With the Treasury policy?
Consistent with. Yeah.
Consistent with?
Okay.
Yeah.
That these
Consistent with.
acknowledges that these are consistent. Maybe.
No, just that's a point. So we're approving those. Oh yeah, it needs a verb. I was going to say in adherence to. What's your verb?
Consistent with.
In consistence with.
No, so it is yes. There you go.
Acknowledges that this is a consistent with.
No, because it's not acknowledging. Because we're approving, provided they're consistent with Treasury.
Approval for A to B to C, E to D is. D is consistent.
You could say approves all of these consistent with the Treasury policy.
Or in adherence to, wasn't that the...
Or approves these in adherence with the policy, with the Treasury
consistent
policy.
with in
I think,
adherence
I just think we have to say in adherence, so we can go with what Cherie said initially, in adherence to the Treasury policy.
Okay, I'll put that through.
So, the motion is that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report, Treasury Strategy Update, approves the issuance of long and short-term debt on a wholesale basis to manage cash flows, approves maintenance of a minimum of 15 million of cash and short-term investments to manage cash flows, approves hedging activities required to maintain within policy limits, all in adherence to the Treasury policy. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Mahe, thank you. Any discussion?
I guess just in the interest rate environment that we're in, I would advocate to continue to reduce our fixed rate, and at the moment, if we are fixing, that we're doing it in short term, and then obviously as interest rates stabilise and hit towards the bottom, we can look to further increase the fixed rate out. I notice we've got about 75% currently fixed rate debt, and in a reducing interest rate environment, I think we should be it would be prudent to be reducing that right now, and as we get towards the bottom, we then increase it again. So that would be my recommendation.
I see some nodding from the team.
Agree.
Yeah, just let us know when we're at the bottom. So.
Mayor Mahe was the seconder. So do we need to put that in the... Do you want a comment on that in the motion?
I'm comfortable that, staff can.
Okay, that's been heard and I think agreed with anyway. So with a mover and a seconder, I put that motion to the committee. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carry. Thank you. Thank you, Cherie and Paul. So 9.5, Local Government Funding Agency Final Audited Annual Report 2023-24. Sorry, we've got Catherine and Caroline. Welcome, thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, Deputy Mayor, Mayor Mahe, councillors. We would like to provide a summary of the key highlights of the LGFA's final audited annual report for the financial year 24 prior to taking questions. So the Local Government Funding Agency is a successful organisation. One of the key reasons why this organisation is successful is because it has a strong and effective governance in place. The governance structure comprised of 31 shareholders, which includes the New Zealand government, and it has a board of directors. Now, the board of directors, they're made up of an independent chair and 4 independent directors and 1 who is non-independent. And the chairs and directors are appointed by the 31 shareholders. Now, this organisation has a strong membership base, so with the exception of Chatham Islands, all New Zealand councils are LGFA members. It has in total 82 members, 77 councils and 5 CCOs. Another reason why it is successful is that this organisation is about putting communities first. The core purpose of this organisation is to provide the optimal financing conditions for its shareholders and members so that the communities that these councils and CCOs serve can benefit from this membership. The financial year 24 is a standout one for the LGFA. This organisation has provided 90% of New Zealand council borrowing in the year to 30th of June. Overall, it had 18 performance targets in its statement of intent. And out of those 18 targets, it exceeded one of those, met 15, and the 2 targets not met were in relation to the total operating expenses at 11.8 million. The target was under 10 million. This was due to the significant increase in its approved issuer levy payments, and 1 new green, social and sustainability loan was undertaken. The target was 2 new GSS loans. So with the addition of the 2 new CCOs as members, this now provides a blueprint or the foundation for future lending to water CCOs under the Local Water Done Well program reform. In its annual stakeholder satisfaction survey, the LGFA achieved a 93% satisfaction score, and the core theme of that survey was what is the value added by the LGFA to the borrowing activities of the local government sector. So the survey was conducted last year in August. It was sent out to 76 stakeholders, and the response rate was 89%, so 68 took part. And finally, this is an award-winning organisation. The LGFA has won a number of awards, including the Editor's Pick for the Treasury for Good Awards, for being the first in the world to introduce a sustainable financing bond in New Zealand. So essentially what this bond underscores is the organisation's commitment, especially in the last 3 years, to the environment and also being socially responsible, while also at the same time attracting a diverse range of investors. So the bond is made up of 2 parts, so the GSS, and the other part is to do with climate change resilience through its Climate Action Loans program. So Deputy Mayor, this concludes the summary of the highlights, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Caroline. Any questions for Caroline? Councillor Crowther?
Yeah, just one minor question, because I'm curious. Bay Plenty Councils are well represented amongst the shareholding, but Rotorua doesn't seem to be there. Is there a reason that you know of for that, or?
So there were Type 9, originally 9 councils that initiated and worked with consultants of the government to set up LGFA, and they were the shareholders, and then over time some of that shareholding was split out to later people joining who wanted to become shareholders. So still the majority of shares are held by those 9 councils at about 8.3%, and then there's sort of most of the other shareholders hold about 0.4%. Some are a little bit higher.
Any other questions? I think you've obviously covered it very well, thank you. So, any other questions on the, no, just in terms of the audited annual report? Nope, okay, so, thank you. So there is a recommendation. Would anyone like to move the recommendation in their paper? Councillor Couric, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Crowther, thank you. Any discussion on the motion?
No other than that, the last year that's going well and growing and delivering good outcomes for councils. And I'm proud to be a member of a council that were, one of the founding members way back whenever that was. I can't remember the year, but it was quite some time ago.
Thank you, Rick.
I agree with that, and I just wanted to acknowledge Catherine's involvement there, and I think that's fantastic for our council, and no doubt fantastic for the organisation itself.
So, that being the case, the motion's on the table as in the paper. All those in favour, say aye. 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 Against? Carried. Thank you. So, 9.6, Local Government Funding Agency Annual Meeting Shareholder Voting. Catherine to introduce this report. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, so the annual meeting of LGFA is on the 19th of November, and so we have in front of you a number of resolutions that, as shareholders, TCC gets to vote on. This is a really important year, actually, for TCC, in that the proposed changes to the foundation policies that are included in these resolutions would be what would enable bespoke covenants under that sort of growth council that support them to have higher debt to revenue for growth purposes. So so that's probably a key item. The other things to vote on are the board membership of the Shareholders Council, which is the kind of group of shareholders that advises all the other shareholders and keeps an eye on board membership, is involved in board recruiting for nominees to go out to the councils, and monitors performance of LGFA. I think, is there any, I'm happy to take questions, that's probably it.
Thank you, Catherine. Have we got some questions?
I'm interested to know who else is on the shareholder council. Yeah.
So at the moment there's Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, Tasman, New Plymouth, ourselves, Regional Council, and Western Bay. So of that group, 8 are of that original 9, and New Plymouth has come on just as a smaller shareholder. Person who came in was interested at the time. She's since left, but the council is currently still there and has a new person attending.
There being no further questions, we have got a motion in the papers, and I am comfortable that we don't need to read it all out. So I'm happy to move this motion. We'll just put it up on the screen so we aren't needing to read out the whole page. Seconded by Councillor Kurak. So the recommendation that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report, notes the recommendations to the Shareholder Council, approves the resolutions and authorises by way of proxy the Chair of Local Government Funding Agency to vote on this on behalf of Tauranga City Council. I have moved it and Rick has seconded it. Is there any discussion? That being the case, all those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Catherine and Paul. So there were no... yes, sorry, we have got... Jeremy has got an answer to one of the questions raised earlier. Thanks, Jeremy.
Just to save the email trail later on. So Councillor Crowther asked about the bus patronage figures, and I said I'd come back with a source. That's actually one of the questions raised in the annual resident survey. So the information here is qualitative and would almost certainly differ from what regional council have got as far as overall patronage. The question is very much, it's actually, if you really want to look at it, it's page 75 of attachment 3 to blah, blah, blah. It's in the resident survey questions, and it talks specifically about travel to work. So the regional council's figures would include travel to school and travel to shops and travel to all sorts of other things. Hence the difference.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. And also, I guess the key point being that it's the survey which may not represent, within margins of error and all that.
Yeah, there's a margin of error of about 4 or 5% at the 95% confidence rating. Over the whole year, you'll get the annual resident survey in 4 bits. So the margin of error on the first tranche is quite high, and the year-to-date margin of error on the second tranche gets a bit lower, and a bit lower after 3. After 4, it comes down to about 4.5%, 5%, I think it is, from memory.
And also from memory, isn't the question in the resident survey, how did you get to work today?
On your most recent trip?
On your most recent trip. So it's actually just, it could be that if that was,
Point in time.
You take public transport all of last week but not today, then you wouldn't have put it in.
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. So there are no late items to discuss. So could I ask for a closing cutting here? Thank you.
Tēnā no tātou, me mehi ka tika ki koutou. Mō tō koutou tere hoki o tēnei hui, te rānei, woohoo! I'll just snip that in there. He whakakapi i tō tātou hui, te rānei, ke hihiri tātou. Ka whakahiri o te tapu ki te paitara whare o tēnei hui, te rānei. Kia tuturu, kia awhiti, whakarawa, kia tīna, haumi e hui e, tā.